Time for another one of our vehicle walk around sort of information videos. And this one is about another vehicle that is super, super important to me. And this vehicle is because it's one of the last vehicles I built on my old television show, Extreme Off-Road. Now, this vehicle started life as a military vehicle, transitioned into civilian life, and then I got my hands on it. And it's definitely a one of a kind. And it is also one of my favorite vehicles. This is Project Lockjaw. The reason that I built this particular Jeep simply revolved around the fact that it landed in my lap. I am a huge Jeep fan. My first four-wheel drive vehicle was a Jeep CJ7. And so I have a soft spot for any Jeep, any make, any model of Jeeps. And I really do want to collect as many Jeeps as I can. And so the 715 was certainly something that was not on my list to get. I appreciated full-size Jeeps. I thought they were cool. But the 715, number one, there's not very many of them, so I didn't think I'd be able to get one. And number two, it just really wasn't at the top of my list until I got a text message one night from a local salvage yard that someone had brought the 715 in across the scales and they were crushing it for scrap. And he called me and he said, if you don't buy this, we're crushing it tomorrow and it's gonna be scrap. And I asked him, well, what do you want for it? He said, I just want you to pay the scrap bill and you can have it. So it was like $1,300 or something like that. So I gave him the money, bought the truck, and I got the 715, and I've fallen in love with it. It's probably one of the most recognizable vehicles when it comes to Jeeps out there. And it certainly turns a lot of heads when you're out wheeling it. We did a rather unique unveil of the vehicle on the show. On the show, we made it seem like I was in the junkyard looking at stuff, and I just sort of saw this thing go by on a front end loader headed to the crusher, and I chased him down and bought it on site. Now, film buffs might recognize that that was a shot-for-shot recreation of the opening sequence to a movie called Corvette Summer. Corvette Summer was a movie that when I was a shop teacher, if we ever had like movie day in the classroom, because you know, like last day before Christmas, last day before summer vacation, you're not really working in the shop with the kids. They're usually like cleaning it up, putting the tools away, getting their projects out of there. So this was one of the movies that I used to play for the kids because it kind of had a shop teacher tie-in, because it was all about Mark Hamill building this Corvette in his high school shop class, and then it gets stolen. And then it's his mission to find this Corvette that they built. It's a funny little movie, but I like the opening sequence, and so I wanted to recreate it for the 715. That's exactly what we did for when we found the truck. So no, we didn't actually find it on a front end loader being dragged off to the crusher. We just recreated that scene. And only a few people have ever got that like clip on clip, because it really was, it was legit shot for shot. Me and my producer at the time sat down and we like, watch the movie, watch the show, watch the movie, watch the show. It's shot for shot remake. It's great. It was absolutely awesome. Specs on the truck are, it's a 1968 M715. Essentially, I kept the body and the frame, and that's pretty much it. It's got all new suspension, even though it's not like fancy new suspension. It's just leaf springs all the way around, but it's matching leaf springs. It's K5 Blazer leaves on all four corners, and I carry one spare K5 Blazer leaf. So if something ever happens to any of the four leaf springs, I have one spare because they're all the same. It has a 5.7 liter Hemi out of a Chrysler 300C car. That feeds into a 545 RFE truck Hemi transmission, which then feeds into an Off-Road Designs Magnum range box and an NP205. It's got a 14 bolt in the rear with an ARB air locker, and it's got a Dana 60 up front also with an ARB air locker, RCV shafts, and it sits on 39-inch red label crawlers on some 17-inch KMC slab beadlocks. The interior, I kept it as bare bones as I could. I just added some gauges, and then it's got a whole bunch of shifters because it's got all those transfer cases in there, set of suspension seats, and that's about it. Even left the factory column in there because I thought it just looked cool. The one thing that I think really changed the most about the vehicle when it comes to basically the specs on it is I bobbed the bed, took about 18 inches off the bed. That really helped with the departure angle when you're off-road. And then the proportions looked a little weird, so I ended up chopping the top. I think I chopped it almost 3 or 4 inches out of the front windshield frame, and then just built a cage off of that. So it really kind of made the truck, give it like a really short, really low roof line, and it really sort of changed how the truck looked, and I think that's what sort of gave gave it that iconic look of basically Project Lockjaw, that when people see it, they get stoked about it when they see me driving it around or at an off-road event. The beds of these trucks are essentially, I think they're made out of like 1/8" steel. Like you can stand on the fender flares of an M715. I can, and I'm over 200 pounds. You can stand on that and there's no deformation of it at all. It basically takes your weight. The trucks are incredibly overbuilt. As a matter of fact, one time when I first built it, when the suspension flexed, the tire was just rubbing on a lip on the inside of the bed, and it was just cutting the edge of the tire. And we were on the trail, and a friend of mine goes, "Oh, just grab a hammer and fold that lip over." And I said, "You go right ahead and try it." And he took a sledgehammer and was wailing on the side of that lip, and he couldn't move it, because I think it's double layered 1/8" steel. 4 people can't pick up the bed, even though I've shaved 18 inches off the back. You have to use a lift or a forklift to get this bed up in the air. It's crazy. It weighs so much. The back of that truck weighs so much. There's tons of stories around Lockjaw. Probably some of the coolest ones are with the history of the vehicle. When we were shooting the show, we really didn't know anything about the truck other than it came from the scrapyard. We knew who dropped it off at the scrapyard, and I contacted him, and he had bought it from an auction in Birmingham, Alabama. That was basically an auction where they basically get rid of surplus vehicles. And it ended up at his farm, and he used it for a while, and then it stopped running, and so he just stuck it in the field. When he stuck it in the field, the floor essentially rotted out of the cab, and so there was no floor in the vehicle when I bought it, so I had to completely replace it. I just built custom, basically flat floors everywhere. The bed was saved because he'd put a diesel fuel tank in the back that had a tiny pinhole leak, and so it just leaked diesel fuel all over the truck bed, and that basically created like almost like a protective barrier on that metal. So that's what saved it, so it didn't rust out at all. But after the show aired, I got an email from somebody who actually worked for the city of Birmingham, and he said that he was working there when they commissioned that truck from the US military. So the way it used to work was when the military was done with something, it didn't just automatically go up for civilian auction. What happened was when they were done with it, apparently other government agencies could request it. So they could put in a request, say, yes, we want to have that vehicle or this thing, whatever they're getting rid of. And so a lot of the 715s ended up being dispersed out to different states and different areas to become just basically workhorse trucks. And this one became part of the Birmingham Emergency Management Association, and it was just part of their, like, if anything ever happens, they have this 1.25 ton ex-military truck to use. The problem with the 715s is they were never very reliable, and so it quickly became obvious to that city or that county that this isn't going to be a reliable truck, so they auctioned it off, and that was when the farmer got a hold of it, and it just basically sat around. So the history of the truck to where it got to me, it's pretty cool, and to be able to get that history, that means even more. When I got the truck, it came with no title because it had never been titled. It had never been put into the system because it went from the US military to state office and then down to an individual. And in some states, depending on what year the vehicle is, they don't even title them. So this was 1968, and so in Alabama, they didn't do titles pre-75, I think it is. So I had to get a title for it. So I contacted the state, went through the process of getting everything taken care of on my end, had to get a bunch of paperwork done, get the vehicle inspected, had to get the VIN checked, which was funny in its own way because the VIN is literally only 6 numbers. There's not a whole bunch of letters, so it kept crashing the system whenever they tried to put the VIN number in. But the funnier story about it is when they were typing it all up at the state, they asked me what I wanted on the title, and I said, well, it's a Kaiser Willys. Let's just put Kaiser Willys on it. They misspelled Kaiser, and so when they short formed the make of the vehicle, it actually says 1968 Kia on my title, which makes me kind of laugh. They since afterwards went back and fixed it, and I got a replacement title because they realized that when it went up to the state, they checked it. They thought there was no 68 Kia, so they actually changed it to Kaih, I think is what they did in the end. But it's kind of funny that for a short period of time, I owned a 1968 Kia M715. So when I went to the state to get it registered, I had to tell them, I said, oh, it's an ex-military vehicle. And they said, oh, is there any weapons or ordnance still on the vehicle? And I said, no, not at all. But they never asked for like proof of that. Like it could have had like a legit machine gun on it. And they were just like okay with me saying, nope, no weapons or ordnance. They're like, okay, fine. As I'm getting older, I find that some of the vehicles that I've built in my younger days they're a little more hardcore throwdown than I would be building now. So nowadays when I'm building stuff, I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe I want air conditioning, maybe I want a windshield in the vehicle, stuff like that. So I really think that maybe in the long run, it may have been better for me to build the 715 and put maybe some of those creature comforts into it, because I think then it might be something that I could drive every single day. It's not something you can drive every day. I might drive it like once or twice a year. It doesn't get a lot of miles on it, mainly because it's literally, no windshield, red label crawlers. It's not the most comfortable thing to be in. Now, places like Moab, when you're there for Easter Jeep Safari, it's absolutely amazing. I've taken it to Sand Hollow and wheeled a bunch of it there. I've taken it and wheeled it in a bunch of different places. The size of the truck makes it a little bit difficult to wheel on this side of the country because I don't want to ruin the body. So I think in the long run, if I was going to change anything, it might just be putting some of those creature comforts back into the truck, because then I might want to use it more often. Cost to build it, it really wasn't that much because everything came from a junkyard. Junkyard transmission, junkyard engine. I guess the Magnum range box was new, but the 205 came from a junkyard. Junkyard axles. It's got leaf springs on all four corners. That's certainly not expensive. I would say probably hard money in that truck, less labor, is maybe $20,000 at the most. Unfortunately now, to find an M715 for a decent price is getting harder and harder and harder. People send me links all the time through social media and they're like, hey, I know you like 715s. This one's for sale near me. And there's trucks that are in almost as bad a shape as that truck was when I got it. And they're asking like $5,000, $6,000. So the reality is old iron Jeeps are getting harder to find. And then you add to the fact that I think there was only 28,000 M715s totally produced. That's not a lot of vehicles. And some of them even went overseas. So the number that are still in the States and the number that are still being used, it's hard to find. So finding a good one is going to be tough to start with. So your budget's probably going to creep up a little bit above that. It's earned a no bump rule truck. So of the few times I've taken it out and wheeled it, where you're trying to climb something, trying to crawl something, and you're like, man, I just can't get up it. And you think to yourself, man, if I just give it a bump, I think I'll make it. Every time that decision is in my head to bump it, many things break. I think it's a combination of the horsepower and all the gearing and the weight. When all that comes together, when that truck gets airborne or jumps over something or bumps over something, when it lands, things break. I took an entire front ring and pinion out of it on Pritchett Canyon on the last obstacle before the big climb to get out. So I had to drag it out, drive it out in two-wheel drive and fix it in Moab. That wasn't fun. I bumped it and basically as an anti-wrap bar in the back, and it literally broke the anti-wrap bar. It landed so hard. I've landed on the rear tire trying to do a bump, and it broke a 14-bolt shaft, and then what I thought was the right spare shaft when I put it in ended up being too long, and that wiped out the wheel bearings by the time I got off the trail. So my buddy Ricky Barry made me a little sign for the dash. Originally, the truck has like all the original military stuff inside, so there's like a no smoking sticker. So we peeled the no smoking sticker off, and he cut me a no bump sticker that basically replaced it. So now there's like a reminder on the dash that if you're ever wheeling it and somebody says, I think you got that, if you just give it a little bit of a bump, you do not bump that truck. You don't do it. You just back off, choose a different line, or pull a cable on the truck and get through it. But honestly, the rig has really never really let me down. The only time I've ever really had issues with it is when I've been putting it in places where it shouldn't be, basically in with buggy stuff. The cool story about the truck is the fact that it really was the last sort of vehicle that I built start to finish on my old television show, Extreme Off-Road. So it's great to have that in the fleet. Owning that truck is kind of, I look at it, that's the one vehicle I look at as like, I don't really own it. I'm just sort of a steward of it because it has such a rich history. Like, I mean, that truck was literally commissioned by the US military, and I don't know what kind of life it lived as a US military truck, but it was in service in the military. And then it was basically transferred down to a state. And then it was sold to a farmer, and then it was sold to me. I don't know where it's gonna end up after I own it, but I'm sure whoever owns it, I hope they respect that history about it because I think it's really cool.